And if you'll see right here, I have this book. You might be asking, what is this? So this is actually what I got when I was 8 years old and I got baptized into the LDS church. In this video, we're going to determine where Mormonism came from, what it teaches, and why it continues to inspire some deep devotion from people all over the world, and also inspire some deep concerns for others. Now, this is not going to be presented as an attack, nor is it going to be considered an endorsement. That's not what I do. We look at the unbiased facts on this channel, and we let people tell their story, both on the side of for and against, and we have the viewer, such as you, make your own rational conclusion on who you want to believe and who you want to follow, allowing you to think for yourself. So whether you're a current member, former believer, or you're just simply curious about Mormonism, how it started, and what is the big deal surrounding Mormonism, and how it went from one man to a global movement that's been occurring over the past almost 200 years, then stay with us as we dive into the roots of Mormonism. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, often called the Mormon Church, is one of the most influential religious movements to originate in the United States. Today, it claims over 17 million members worldwide, vast financial holdings, it's worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and deep cultural influences all over the world. But Mormonism didn't begin as a global institution. It began with one man, one vision, and a claim that all existing churches were corrupt and that you should abstain from them. So to understand how the Mormon church became what it is today, we need to trace it through its prophetic origins. New scripture, secret documents, conflicts, institutional transformation. We're going to look at all these different things using the words of its own founders and the prophets and seers and revelators, wherever possible, in order to paint an unbiased picture of what the LDS church is and what it represents exactly. So let's start in the beginning. Joseph Smith and his first vision. So I remember being taught in the LDS church that when Joseph Smith was about 14 years old, he would attend regular tent revivals with his family, and they would go to different preachers. And on his way home, he was curious as to which church he should join because, it's good to have a church family, and he wasn't sure which one was delivering the right message. And so through guidance from his family, what he did was his parents basically said, you should go ask God. So basically he took that to heart. He went to a grove to pray. And when he prayed, a darkness came over him and it was as if he was suffocating. And shortly after the darkness came over him, it left. So it wasn't a long time. And then as soon as it left, he looked up and he saw two figures dressed in white, basically like a flaming figure, like how you would imagine God would appear in a vision. But he saw two figures and he asked the question, which church should I join? Basically, what's your true church? He was asking God that. And in his official 1838 account, Smith wrote, this was his answer, Smith wrote, I was answered that I must join none of them, for they were all wrong. All their creeds were an abomination in his sight. You can see this in Joseph Smith History 1:9. However, in Smith's earlier accounts from 1832, it differs significantly, describing only one being and not two appearing. This discrepancy would actually later arise some concerns among historians, especially LDS historians. But regardless, Joseph Smith claims that this was the foundation of why he created the Latter-day Saint Church, because basically Christianity had fallen into apostasy, and because it fell into apostasy, that means basically no one could be saved, and all the different churches were corrupt, and that you couldn't receive salvation. And so it was his mission that God gave to him to restore the correct church on the earth. Sounds like an organization that, if you've been following my channel, that we came from, right? So then where does the Book of Mormon come from, right? So we have Joseph Smith. When he was a teenager, he had this vision, right? So that kind of kickstarted everything. But then what is the Book of Mormon that everybody is holding when they're knocking on doors with the name tags? What is that book and where does it come from? That's probably your next question. So let's talk about that. The Golden Plates and the Book of Mormon. In 1823, Joseph Smith claimed that an angel named Moroni, so Moroni is an angel in the Book of Mormon. He used to be a man that was basically killed as the last righteous person and the hill Cumorah. That's a whole other story that we'll talk about later, but just for a little bit of context there. So anyway, this angel, who was a man, appeared to him in his bedroom in his sleep one night and revealed to him a location of some golden plates that contain the history of the ancient Israelites. But not the ancient Israelites you're thinking of, the ancient Israelites that actually crossed the ocean from Israel to the Americas and basically became the indigenous people that you and I know today that we learned in the history books. Again, that's a whole other story that we'll describe and talk about later. Essentially, now we have the golden plates appear. So Joseph Smith goes and gets the golden plates, and then when he has the golden plates, he starts the process of translating them with Oliver Cowdery. Now, we'll talk about that whole thing and the translation process later, but this is just an overview, remember? So Smith described the translation process this way. He said, "Through the medium of the Urim and Thummim, I translated the record by the gift and power of God." Joseph Smith, Wentworth Letter, 1842. Now you might be asking, what's the Urim and Thummim? Well, they're basically seer stones that he would place in a top hat and he would look into. But again, more on that later. Witnesses later claimed, in regards to the golden plates, witnesses later claimed that they had seen them, but there was a quotation, with spiritual eyes, right? Not necessarily physically seen them, but seen them with spiritual eyes. But despite these claims, no evidence has ever been found, and there is no plates to actually look at today, because according to the LDS faith, the golden plates were taken back up into heaven. We don't know why, but God chose to. So now let's talk about the founding of the church that declares prophetic authority. So on April 6, 1830, Joseph Smith officially organized the church. Smith asserted absolute prophetic authority, stating, "I never told you I was perfect, but there is no error in the revelations which I have taught." Joseph Smith History of the Church, Volume 6. So this idea creates this, understanding that his revelations cannot be questioned, and his revelations not only couldn't be questioned, but became essential for the Mormon foundation and how doctrines would be produced within the church. And also, strict adherence to his doctrine and obedience was basically mandatory at that time. Smith also declared himself the only authorized revelator at that time. He said, "There is none other appointed unto you to receive commandments and revelations until he be taken." Doctrine and Covenants 43:3. Let's also talk about the leadership structure of the church. So, as you see it now, basically how the structure of the church works is they have a living prophet who is the head person, who is basically the one who receives words from God, revelation from God. And then under him, and by his side rather, you have first and second counselor. Then the second group of authority is the quorum of the 12 apostles, right? So they basically get that idea from the New Testament, right? Because Jesus had 12 apostles. And then below them, you have the quorum of the 70, and they basically help delegate some of the less meaningful things, but still crucial to the operations of the church. So that's kind of the structure of the up top. But then in your local churches, you have a ward, which is basically a church building. It's just a normal church congregation. And typically you have a few different wards going to the same building. And how it works is you'll have different time blocks to which different wards go to. And how the wards are split up is basically off of zoning. So if you have different zones, you'll go to different time. So for instance, one year you might go from 9 to 12. The next year you might go from 11 to 2. The next year you might go from 1 to 4. Right? So multiple wards use the same church. Now you might be asking, well, who leads the ward? Well, there's a bishop who is called who leads the ward. He's kind of like the pastor, but the bishop isn't a permanent fixture. He actually changes every few years, depending on the calling. And the bishop has a first and second counselor as well, a treasurer, and some other positions that are volunteer as well. So everyone is volunteer. No one gets paid for these roles. They volunteer their time and their efforts willingly. And then if we take the scope out a little bit further, these wards are basically in what's called a stake. Right? So a stake is a big zone. You can think of a big zone, right? So they have what's called a stake center where multiple wards from multiple churches gather to hear, let's say, priesthood sessions or maybe a general conference or some sort of talk or education or whatever the case is. So in a bigger scope, stakes contain multiple wards, right? Multiple churches, and that's all under the umbrella of a stake. So there's a stake president and first and second counselor, and obviously it goes on and on. So they have a very vast leadership structure as far as how the church operates. Now, let's go back to the history. I just wanted to explain that to you because this is just a brief overview of how the LDS church operates. So let's get back to the history. Let's talk about some of the secret doctrines and especially polygamy. I would say, as far as even being LDS, probably one of the most common things I was asked in high school was, do you believe in having multiple wives? Even to this day, there are fundamentalist Mormons that have plural wives. And even though it's illegal, I mean, you see the Warren Jeffs of the world. So even Mormonism over time broke off into different sects, and they held to a lot of the original teachings, such as plural marriage. And this is where it came from. Even though Joseph Smith publicly denied it for years, Joseph Smith privately introduced polygamy, claiming divine command. This is what he said. If any man espouse a virgin and desire to espouse another, then is he justified. Doctrine and Covenants 132:61. Smith warned that rejecting this revelation would actually bring destruction. So it wasn't a if you want to, it was a mandatory teaching. He also said, "For behold, I reveal unto you a new and everlasting covenant, and if ye abide not in that covenant, then are ye damned." Doctrine and Covenants 132, verse 4. So Smith secretly married over 30 women, including teenagers and women already married to other men. Facts not openly acknowledged by the church until 21st century. Which I would argue, based on the evidence, that is probably why a lot of people shunned Mormons back in the day, because of the plural marriage practice. Now let's move on to Nauvoo. Nauvoo is one of the focal points of early Mormonism, and this is where the power and suppression of dissent really started to make a name for itself in the religion. In Nauvoo, Illinois, Joseph Smith became mayor, military general, and prophet all in one. It was even said that he was going to run for president. Brigham Young later described Smith's authority bluntly. He said, "He was prophet, seer, and revelator, and if he had said the moon was made of green cheese, it would have been my duty to believe it." Brigham Young in the Journal of Discourses. So when dissenters exposed the polygamy through the Nauvoo Expositor, Smith ordered that the printing press be destroyed, an act that directly led to his arrest. Which brings us to Carthage Jail. Now, Carthage Jail is basically the place where, when he was arrested, he was put into in Carthage, Illinois. Now, in 1844, he was killed by a mob. He was shot to death, essentially. He was shot out of a window and fell, and they shot him while he was on the ground, while he was awaiting trial. Following his death, Brigham Young declared, "Joseph Smith laid the foundation, and we build upon it stone by stone." Smith's death transformed him from a controversial religious figure to a martyr that has been cemented for eternity in the LDS memory. Now we move on. After the death of Joseph Smith, we come to Brigham Young, which was the second prophet and president of the LDS Church. Brigham Young, and then obviously we're going to move on to the Utah Theocracy, because Utah was founded by the LDS. Now we'll get to that in a second. After Smith's death, Brigham Young emerged as the leader of the largest Mormon faction. Young taught doctrines far more openly, and it was a lot harsher than Joseph Smith ever taught. For instance, he said, "The only men who become gods, even the sons of gods, are those who enter into polygamy." Brigham Young, Journal of Discourses, Volume 11. Young also taught what became known as Adam God doctrine. This is an interesting one. He said, "When our father Adam came into the Garden of Eden, he came with a celestial body. He is our Father and our God." Journal of Discourses, Volume 1. But as time progressed, this doctrine was actually disavowed by the LDS Church, and so was polygamy. But yet, even though polygamy was banned by the church physically, they still practice spiritual polygamy even to this day. So you have to remember, the reason why the temple exists is so they can be married together for time and all eternity. That's a very big focal point of the LDS faith, is they believe in eternal families. And they also believe that we were with God in the kingdom of heaven. We were with God in the kingdom of heaven, and basically Jesus and Satan came to God, the Father, and presented two different plans. Obviously, Satan's plan was a no-go, so we took Jesus' plan and decided we want to become like God, so God sent us to this earth to have a human body to become like him and live out our days so that way we can figure out between right and wrong and choose between right and wrong with free will, in hopes we make it back to our heavenly home, which is to live with God in one of the three kingdoms. Now, yes, Mormon heaven is divided into three kingdoms. You have the celestial, telestial, and terrestrial. And there's something called outer darkness for people who haven't accepted the truth. And once they accept the truth in the afterlife, then they can move on depending on what covenants are made on their behalf. Because again, They do baptisms for the dead, they do marriages for the dead, they do all these different covenants for the dead. So even though somebody is dead and gone, they can still have salvation work done via proxy in the LDS temple. So the LDS temple is a very big focal point when it comes to the Mormon religion. I would say even the cornerstone of the Mormon religion. But when we talk about disavowed doctrines, one thing I want to talk about is the blood atonement that was taught in the early Mormonism movement. So let me read this off. This is some research I did. So the core belief of blood atonement is basically some serious sins like betrayal, leaving the truth, or certain other grave transgressions place individuals beyond the atoning power of Christ's blood, necessitating their own blood to be shed for redemption. Basically meaning Jesus' blood didn't do enough, therefore you must die in order for your sins to be atoned for. This was basically taught from Brigham Young in the 1850s, linking it to capital punishment and severe penalties for apostatizing or breaking these covenants that they did in the temple, these covenants that they hold very sacred. However, you move to the modern day LDS, the mainstream LDS, they denounced this as a false teaching, stating that Christ's atonement covers all sins, and it was never officially implemented. So basically, even though Brigham Young taught it, who was a prophet, they denounce it, and they said it was never officially put into practice, but it did affect quite a few people. This blood atonement was linked historically to events like the Mountain Meadows Massacre, where Native Americans and settlers were massacred. Lastly, one of the things that they got rid of in the temple especially was the penalties and oaths that they had to do in the temple. Prior to 1990, the endowment ceremony included symbolic gestures, often referred to as penalties and oaths, that represented the physical consequences participants agreed to accept if they revealed any of the temple's sacred information. Basically, they had to go like this. These were explicitly removed from the ceremony in a major revision in 1990. And when we say major revision, it means that there was a revelation to block it out. And one of the main controversies, I would say too, before we move on to the next point here, is for a long time, if you were Native American or you're black or Mexican, if you were basically dark skinned, you were considered unrighteous. And that's even in their holy book. Oh yeah, I have the holy book. Especially if you read 2nd and 3rd Nephi, it kind of paints that picture to where literally people will go from white to black because of sin. But if they repent, they go from black to white. So blacks and really anyone of color could not hold the priesthood until around the 1960s, 1970s, after the Civil Rights Act was signed. Now they could participate in the ceremonies, blacks and Hispanics and anyone of color. So just some of the things that have changed over time, but moving on. So now we're moving into the Brigham Young era, and Brigham Young emphasized unquestioning obedience to church leadership. He said, I say rather than that apostate should flourish here, I will unsheath my bowie knife. Brigham Young, Journal of Discourses, and when the prophet speaks, the thinking has been done. Attributing LDS teaching, later echoed in the church culture, right? Under Brigham Young, Utah became a theocratic society where church discipline, exile, and violence were real tools of control back in the day. Also, through the teaching of polygamy, which was still carried on by Brigham Young, they started having conflict with the United States. So, facing federal pressure, the LDS Church officially ended polygamy in 1890, and Brigham Young had earlier framed the issue as a non-negotiable, right? Like if you wanted to be a son of God, you had to be a polygamy. That was from the prophet's mouth. So obviously, if the feds are requiring you to disband your belief or face consequences, typically how we see in these groups sometimes, survival requires compromise, marking the beginning of Mormonism transferring into a more mainstream institution that's not so culty, if that makes sense. So basically you have Mormonism going from this small, unknown, relatively unknown, controversial group to now being a global corporation, right? Over the 20th century, Mormon leadership centralized authority and sanitized history and shifting the public message, shifting the public image into a more appealing and appetizing religion as opposed to how it started. Joseph Smith claims still stand at the heart of the church. He said, I am like a huge rough stone rolling down from a high mountain. The only polishing I get is when some corner gets rubbed off. That's actually a direct quote from Joseph Smith. So, the stone is now a polished global institution worth hundreds of billions of dollars, but its origins remain deeply contested and deeply controversial. And if you'll see right here, I have this book. You might be asking, what is this? So, This is actually what I got when I was 8 years old and I got baptized into the LDS church. Now you might be asking, what is this book? Well, this book contains the Holy Bible, the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. So let me explain what the Doctrine and Covenants are. Basically, the Doctrine and Covenants is exactly what it sounds like. All the covenants that have been taught about by the prophets and the doctrine that has been talked about by the prophets. And the Pearl of Great Price is essentially some translations from the Book of Moses put together, which that's a whole other animal in and of itself. So don't worry, we'll see this again, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to kind of go through it. It's very interesting. There's a lot of history. It's a lot of, my heritage, like I said in the beginning of this video, my heritage comes from the pioneers that came across and settled Utah. So this is going to be an interesting series where we're going to be talking about a bunch of different things. It's going to be awesome. Super excited about it. So Mormonism, it started off as a pretty rough religion, pretty culty, but over time it progressed and it started shaving off its rough edges. Now it's more easy on the eyes and palatable. So that way, it's able to be digested by a lot more people. And now we see the LDS and what they are today. But their origins is always fascinating, and the history around it has always been fascinating to me. The words of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young reveal a moment built on prophetic authority, obedience, and evolving doctrine. Often, sometimes at human cost, but at the same time, as some of these groups start out, they change and they morph and they turn into the organizations that we see them today. So understanding Mormonism today means first you got to start at the beginning, because if you don't take a look at the beginning where they started, you're not going to know exactly who they are. Because I think deep down in the root, right, they still hold to the teaching of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. It's a more palatable version. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff to get into, but this is just basically a brief overview of everything. This is going to be what we're talking about going forward. We're going to have a bunch of videos like this going into, like I said, going into the temple stuff, going into some of the different things in the Book of Mormon, in the Pearl of Great Price, in the Doctrine and Covenants, just talking about a bunch of different things. I'll talk about, me doing baptisms for the dead and my baptism when I was 8, and just, talk about all the different memories that I had. And I think it'll be a good series, and I'm excited about it. And let me know if you guys like it or not, and like, share, and subscribe, and do all that good stuff. Thanks.